Hey everybody, I am Jennifer Schmidt from Oasis Wellness, and it has been ages since I made a video or a podcast or anything like that. I had a friend say to me a couple months ago, "Hey, you need to start doing videos and podcasts again." And I thought, well, yeah. And then 3 days later, a woman named Sunday Oliver contacted me and said, "Hey, I think I should be on your podcast. I'd love to tell my story and share it with your readers, with your listeners." And I thought, that's pretty auspicious timing. And then I learned more about Sunday. We had an amazing conversation, and I said, yes, we have to do an interview together. So fast forward a couple of months, and here we are. I hope you enjoy this interview with Sunday Oliver. Her story is so moving, and I'm going to read you her bio. And she says, "Changing her consciousness is why Sunday is alive. She had a disease that medical science said couldn't be cured, but it could be cured. Finding her way to healing drew on decades of training and took them to new levels that allow her to help others, even if they're halfway around the world. Her 28 years of living without electricity and running water gave her a relationship with the elements and the natural world they create that very few people in the industrial world have. And on the flip side, her very analytical work as an indexer and book reviewer has refined her abilities to understand underlying themes and subtle connections, abilities she uses all the time in her healing work. Over 40 years, she has collected a bouquet of healing skills: botany, plant-spirit connection, and planetary relationships with plants. She is a BA in literature and a BA or BS in plant medicine. She is trained in nutrition, color healing, sound and music healing, magnetic healing, flower essences, quantum touch, Reiki, essential oils, shamanic and ceremonial work, and more. But her true education has come from being in woods and by water and listening deeply. This is the power that turns the impossible into the possible." You can get a free piece of her recorded work, Inspiring Action, by signing up at www.sundayoliver.com. It will gently but powerfully motivate you to do what needs to be done. You'll also get a newsletter that gives you access to 3 healing calls to help you in this time: going deeper than fear, reviving from exhaustion, and grief. And I can tell you, having experienced Sunday's healing work personally, it's very powerful. And I'm so excited for you to hear her story and learn how listening to our intuition is the first step on our path to healing. All right. I hope you enjoy. Let me know. You can email me at jennifer@earthbasedmedicine.com and let me know what you think. All right, guys, here you go. Sunday, I'm so excited for you to be here. It's been a long time since I've done a video or a podcast, so it's really meant so much to me when you reached out and said, "Hey, what do you think? I'd love to be on your podcast." And I took a look at your work and I said, "Oh my gosh, yes, this is the perfect time with everything going on in the world right now for us to come together and have this conversation." So thank you so much for joining me today. And I'm really excited for you to share your journey and the work that you do, because it's really inspirational for everyone who's wondering, where the heck do we go from here? I think this is a really important place to start. So I want to start with your own healing journey, and wondering if you will share the parts of your healing journey you're comfortable to share, and what it's been like for you on this journey.
Thanks. I really am happy to be here too, Jennifer. And I just want to say that I think it's so magical how sometimes we make these connections at just the right time and just the right moment. That I happened to reach out to you at a time when you were just ready to go. And when, as you say, a lot of people are going through the same kind of total uncertainty that I went through with 10 years of this illness. So in a way, I kind of feel like I've had like 10 years of training for this whole pandemic, because I know a lot about social isolation, that's for sure. My illness was one of those mystery ones: high neurological content, high endocrine content, high autoimmune content. There are lots of names for these illnesses, but I tend to not, I mean, mine was chronic fatigue immune dysfunction syndrome, but the thing is, they all swap symptoms. They all, you know, it's like there's supposed to be some medical, you know, categorization of what happens in what disease. And those are just not true. The medical community just does not have much of a handle on these illnesses as a rule. There are certain people out there that are doing amazing work, but just in general, when I came down with my illness, first, I didn't even know what it was. You know, it's just like, it was just this weird thing that suddenly I had no energy to do anything. And I thought it was, okay, well, I'm just going through depression because I have dealt with depression a lot in my life. And then I would do things like I would force myself to get out of bed. And one time when I did that, I passed out between two sharp surfaces. So then I started rethinking things and thinking, okay, this really is an illness. This isn't just me having a mood or, you know, feeling reluctant or procrastinating. It's something else. And what happened was gradually my life just got smaller and smaller. And I was less and less able to do things like read and eat, and even, and definitely sleep. I didn't sleep for like, I didn't sleep a full night for something like 3 or 4 years. And that turns you into a complete zombie. So, but yet, you know, and probably like many people, I just didn't want it to be happening. So I did my best to ignore it, you know, it's sort of like I tried to work around it. I tried to pretend it wasn't there. Then when it became obvious it was there, I did a ton of research because I am really good at research. I have a lot of experience in research, especially in the health department. And I've even dealt with illnesses that were chronic before and done it through research, and it worked, you know, so I found the protocols and they worked. So this time I did a ton of research and I followed protocols, and I was like really, really diligent about it. You know, I think there's this thing that probably a lot of us have, that if I can just find the right rules and follow them, everything will be okay. But, you know, life actually is not like that. So as I found, to my dismay, all my research, all my diligence, none of that worked. I got worse. And then when I was at the point where if I read a sentence, I would forget the beginning before I got to the end. And if I dialed on a landline, I had to write out the number in really big digits and look at it every 2 digits, because that's all my memory would hold. When I got to that point, when I really couldn't do a lot of thinking and research and any of that, then I just listened. Really, really, really deeply listened. And that was the beginning of a really big change for me. Because I think I hadn't taken my intuition, my inner guidance very seriously in some ways. I mean, I had in some ways, I had let it lead me to things, but there was also this almost fundamentalist religious belief that I had in the power of the intellect and of rationality. And I, you know, hewed to that. And yet it did not serve me. You know, it wasn't serving me. Not even my own brain was serving me at that point. I wasn't really capable of much thought or much speech. A 10-minute phone call was like a full day's work when I would like fall back sweaty on my bed. So listening was the only thing I could do. And when I listened, I began to get inspiration. I got an inspiration to go to a hot springs for 4 months, and that was like seemingly impossible, but somehow somebody actually gave me the money to do that, which was completely unexpected. Not a person I would ever have expected to do this, not something I ever would have expected to happen, but it happened. And that was the beginning of my healing, because I began to calm down my nervous system at that point. And that's something that is really key in my view for any illness, is if you don't calm down your system, very few things are going to really land and work for you on any steady, reliable basis. So I thought, you know, after going to the hot springs, that I was going to come back and I was going to be all cured, and I was going to have like the 12 steps to curing these weird diseases. You know, it's like I was going to write the book and blah, blah, blah. Well, that did not happen. And, you know, because what I found was it's a much deeper journey than that. you know, I think that's one of the things about these illnesses that is in a weird way good, because they are insoluble by conventional means. So you have to really go deep.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I got home and I wasn't miraculously all well, no matter how much I tried to pretend I was, I started listening to a lot of telesummits with energy healers. And I had always been interested in and practiced shamanic kinds of, done shamanic practices through my life. It is one of the reasons why I lived without running water and electricity for 28 years, is because I just had this deep urge to be connected with the natural world and with the elements. And I'll tell you, being physically with them is a really good way to do that. So I learned a lot in that way. So I had background, and I had a lot of background in alternative health as well. But I needed that extra element, because all of those things, all of that background, those weren't working for me. Shamanic practices in a way were, but a lot of shamanic practices are physical, and I could barely stand up. So, you know, like that wasn't happening. So I learned to translate that through help with healers that I worked with, especially a specific few, because honestly, not many healers can approach the nervous system. It's just it's very weird. It's sort of the nexus between physical reality and less physical reality. And I think that for a lot of people, that's a very difficult area to span. So I worked with a few healers, and I began to sort of pick up by transmission how to do energy healing myself. And then I realized that that was really helping me, you know, sort of like my progress was, you know, it was things like, well, lifting my hand was no longer an athletic event. You know, it's like I was really pretty far down there. So making progress was, I just had to notice the increments. I had to be patient with that. Sometimes I was not patient with that. So for anybody out there who's dealing with one of these kinds of illness, yeah, take some time out to despair, to scream, and to cry, because I did all of those. But also take some time to mitigate your situation and do something that's a little more, that allows you to make that motion, to progress. So after I did that, I learned that I could also basically broadcast this healing to other people. I could record it. And I started working with other people. And it was just, and it still is to me, just this amazingly joyous experience, because you can address things that are so difficult to do if you use the rational, intellectual methods that you may even never get through if you use those methods. So I don't, you know, it's like there's no, I definitely do not have any steps 1 through 12 about how to do this, but there are themes, and there are certain things that you can address that will help you progress through it. And I learned them the hard way, and that's not maybe the ideal way to learn them, but that's how I learned them.
I love that the first step of your journey was to listen to your intuition, and the way it all came into place in a totally unexpected way. That you had this intuition that you needed to go to a hot spring for 4 months, and the how didn't matter, because you said yes. You listened to the intuition and you said, okay, I have to do this. And the universe said, yes, you do have to do this. This is what your intuition was telling you. And I think that's such a powerful thing for people to remember, is how critical our intuition and listening to our intuition is, when our sort of left brain system is telling us, you know, oh, science says this. Oh, you know, and even for you doing some of the alternative protocols and still not seeing the results you wanted, you just had to stop everything and go inward.
Yeah, that's a really good description of it. And I think that, you know, in the times we're in now, that's particularly good advice. Not that I'm dissing science, because I'm a, you know, I'm a believer in science, but science will only take you so far. And I think that what we're dealing with now is just such a large picture time, when everybody has to look at different ways of navigating the world, because the world is changing and there's nothing really we can do about it.
In
you
the
know.
moments along your healing journey, what did you do when you felt afraid? I'm sure there were moments where you felt fear.
Oh,
You,
absolutely.
how did you move through those moments?
Well, I think that energy healing would be the answer to that. First, it was I had healers who helped me, and then second, it was I learned how to do it myself. And I'm still learning how to navigate fear because I think actually you can use fear in a really skillful way, but that wasn't something I was taught, and I think it's not something a lot of us are taught. I think we're just taught, oh well, you know, either drown in it or avoid it as much as possible. But no, neither of those worked.
Right, the middle ground.
Yeah.
What are some of the other lessons you learned about healing through your own journey?
Well, a huge one was not to fight my illness.
Mhm.
And this is one of the things that I see coming up over and over and over again, not only in the medical model, but also in the alternative healing model, is how noble and wonderful it is to fight your illness. Let me tell you a few things about that. When you fight anything, what you do is, as I'm sure you know, you start up a response in your body that creates cortisol, which floods your body with basically inflammation. And
Mhm.
that reaction is good in the short term if you want to run away from something physical, but it's terrible in the long term if you want to get well. And something that Baylor and Harvard medical schools have both done studies on is the fact that inflammation is the cause of 95% of all illnesses. So if you're trying to get better from an illness, fighting an illness and creating a constant cortisol response and flood in your body, not a good idea. But it's a very tough one to get over because, of course, we don't want to have the illness, right? You know, so it's like the idea is, well, you get rid of it. Well, that's not really possible. It's like Einstein says, you cannot create or destroy energy. You can only transmute it. So that would be one of the major things that I learned, was to stop fighting my illness. And believe me, it's a really hard thing to do because this is what we're taught to do in this culture, right? You know, it's sort of like, well, you fight through, you meet your challenges, you do all that. You might be able to get some temporary ground that way, but if you're looking long term, no.
So it's like acceptance and surrender without giving up.
Yes, very good way of putting it. Yeah, to just be open. And that sort of ties into the listening to your intuition thing as well. Because when we listen to our intuitions, if we're really getting a message, it's a peaceful message. Might not thrill you, you know, you might not be like absolutely delighted to get the message, but it's not going to be this sort of like, oh, buckle up, or, you know, charge ahead, or, you know, all those things. It's not going to be like that.
Hey, don't be such a wimp.
Yeah, right. That one. That's a really good one, huh?
Oh,
And I did that to myself when I was like, you know, lying flat and unable to turn my head. It was just like, wow.
right. So instead of saying, what is wrong with you,
Mm-hmm.
turning that around into, I don't know, I'm just trying to think how you would turn that, because we often shame ourselves if we're not well.
Well, here, yeah, that's very true. And I did a lot of that, believe me, because this culture kind of, we're a little bit fascistic in the sense of like, well, if you're not super able, then there is something wrong with you and you're not contributing to society and blah, blah, blah. I think that for me, and this is really, it's interesting that you bring this up because this is really the total basis of healing. And it sounds very simple. It's not so easy to do, but it is very simple. And that is thinking something's wrong with you or trying to think that something's right with you. This is again another fight, right? It's sort of like two poles, one here, one there. And the analogy that I learned to work with is, think of it like clothes poles in a yard. You know, you have a pole here, you have a pole there. And usually we're taught to either be on one pole or the other, or to kind of zip between the two poles. That was kind of my choice, to you know, like to pop from, oh, I'm terribly wrong, you know, there's something really wrong with me, to, oh, well, you know, I'm really great. You know, a lot of self-help things tell us to do this sort of thing. And none of that generally tends to work. And the reason is because we're not looking at the line between those two closed poles, where there's this whole huge range of possibilities. And then beyond that, we're not looking at the yard that the closed poles are sitting in, that the line is sitting in, the whole context. And that's where you really have to go. That's where I had to go in order to really heal. And that is where I go when I do healing work with other people, because when you're beyond that polarity thing, you can include the polarities, but you don't have to be stuck in them.
Mm-hmm. Makes me think about, just the energy between the polarities, and the, when you think about two magnets, for instance, when they're repelling each other, or when they're coming together, that magnetism between them, and they have that energy, and the importance of the terrain around them too. What is the environment like around it?
Yeah. I think that's one of the things that a lot of science doesn't consider. I think there are branches of science that do, or at least that are starting to.
Yeah.
But I think that there is certainly value in looking at the specific, absolutely. But if it's not in the context of the big picture, I think that this also brings us to why we have things like, we pollute our water in order to have a better economy, so which doesn't make any sense, whatever, if you look at it. So yeah.
You've worked so much with people over the years. Why do you think it's so challenging for people to listen to their intuition when it comes to their healing journey?
Oh gosh, that's a really great question. I think it's because we are, I guess the word that's coming up to me is brainwashed, so I'll just go with it.
Go with it, yeah.
We're brainwashed to look at the world in a certain way. And that's not just what we're taught in school, but it's also what our parents teach us. It's what we learn on the job. It's sort of like there's this zeitgeist of this part of the world is real and this part of the world is not real. But speaking of science, the interesting thing is that quantum physics, for instance, or a lot of astrophysics, shows that these things that are not so material are actually very real and are having very real effects on us, and in fact kind of go in and out of physical material reality. I think one of the greatest things that was inspiring to me was reading about the new model of the atom, which is, we used to think of the atom as sort of like this little miniature solar system where there's a nucleus and there are the ions and electrons and so forth revolving around it. But actually, as it turns out, the atom is really mostly space and hardly has any matter in it at all. I mean, the analogy I use is, and I'm not even sure how accurate this is, but it might be much bigger difference, but a pinhead in a football field. So what actually is solid? But the thing is, our culture does not teach us to look at this. It teaches us to look at what we deem as solid, even though nothing really is. And I think it's a really interesting time in human evolution that we're beginning to look at that and see what happens with that.
But the space in between, so it's not just what we can see. We have been taught, if you can't see it, don't believe it if you can't see it.
Yeah, absolutely. We have been taught that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And, there is also the thing of, and I have done this a lot of my life, so confessing right here, there is also the thing of having like a fantasy life where you're kind of like dreaming and fantasizing about things. And that can be detached from physical reality and kind of land you in bad places. So I'm sure that a lot of people have that experience too. Again, I think it's like the two closed poles, the solid, what we call solid reality and the non-solid reality. Those are just, parts of a continuum, or, little bits in a mandala. They aren't separate really.
Mm-hmm. And the balance between them all.
Yeah. The dance between them all, I think of it as, because everything's constantly moving and shifting around. And I think in some ways that's kind of an upsetting notion for a lot of people, because we like to think of things being, regular, and human beings tend to not like change a whole lot. But in other ways, it opens up so many things. because, for instance, it opened me up to getting better from an illness I was supposed to get worse and die from. So that's pretty physical.
Yeah, very physical. In your years of working with people, what are some of the messages people have gotten about their illness and their health issues? I mean, we talked about some of the messages, that people can get. What that you got on your journey? What are some of the messages you've seen people get on their healing journeys?
Oh, that's a great question, because when I do healing, I do want to go to the root of something, not just to cover the symptoms. So yes, the messages are important, and that's what I tend to sort of pick up for people, and also they pick it up for themselves.
Mm.
So for instance, I worked with one woman who had really horrible back pain, and she'd been to a chiropractor like 5 times, but it still wasn't really, doing anything. So I worked with her, and it turned out she had a friend who had basically kind of betrayed her. She'd offered him some work, and he, in her own, she was working for a company, and she had him come in on a contract, and he basically completely blew it, like embarrassingly blew it, and ruined the whole situation. So that was really what was bothering her. And that was what was creating the situation that made the back pain recurrent. Not to say there wasn't something physical going on there, but as it was one of those interesting ones where as I worked with her, she was walking around and saying, okay, yes, better and better and better. So these things, you don't think they will affect you in these ways, but they really do. They really have physical effects. Another woman I worked with, she had an illness sort of similar to mine. And one of the things that came up for her was that childhood hurts were really playing into what was going on with her, that there were injuries and scars and traumas that she had that just had remained with her and were helping to create this situation to bring it to her attention, basically, for healing. So that was pretty cool.
It's pretty amazing the people I know when they heed the message, as crazy as the message might seem or as unusual as it might seem, when they heed the message, it's like it opens the path wide open. Almost like, the prince in Sleeping Beauty when he's the only one who can break the thorns that have grown around the castle. Right? And
Yeah. Yeah, fairy tales have great analogies like that. And I agree with you so much about that. It's sometimes it does seem really nutty, but I've just learned to trust it. Like one time I was working with a woman, I just did this by email. She was in South Africa, and she was a land rights activist. And she was kind of burning out dealing with government, which you can imagine. So I did a healing work for her, and I said, the message I got was, remember what it was like when you were little. And I had no idea what that meant, but I just sent it off to her, and she wrote me back and she said, when I was really young, up until I was 6, I lived on this farm, and I went barefoot, and I connected with all the trees and the plants and the animals and the rocks on the land. And that was like her joy spot, that was her joy. And so, it made total sense, but she had to interpret that, she had to understand that in herself.
mm-hmm. Oh, that's amazing. I read a story recently about a man who kept saying he was having all these problems with his arm. And apparently he kept saying, I'd give my right arm for XYZ to happen.
Holy crap.
And you think about, when someone says, oh, they stabbed me in the back, and they're going through back pain.
It's really true. These things that we say idiomatically without thinking, they have a lot of power. You're absolutely right.
I find that during this pandemic, I've had to be very mindful in my choice of words. And sometimes I'll say something and I'll think, no, I take it back. I don't think that way. When people say, well, how are you? I always say, I say physically we're doing great. And emotionally, we're really looking forward to being able to, go out and go to the beach with our friends and go to have a party in our backyard. And, so instead of instead of saying negatively, like, God, everything, like, it sucks, we're miserable, and reinforcing some of the fear and the anger and the negative emotions we do feel. So not setting them aside, not ignoring them, but also not verbalizing them and reinforcing them over and over in the conversations that are just naturally taking place from people who are reaching out to each other out of genuine love and concern, and do want to know how people are doing. And, you know, we talked when we were talking before the interview about just this energy of grief that is permeating right now. And it's not so much, you know, it comes for every individual, it's coming from a different place. For some people, it might be more economic. For some people, they've lost someone. For some people, it's fear. There's just all these different areas where grief is coming from. And I was wondering if you could walk us through a healing on grief for however long you want to take, but just what that sort of globally and for individuals, what that feels like.
I would love to do that. Thanks for giving me the space to do that. And I also want to speak to what you were saying about, you know, thinking carefully about how we use our words, because they do have power. And that is, again, also a really basic part of healing that I had to learn, was to not pretend the bad stuff wasn't there, but to also look at what was there that I could appreciate, that was possible for me to appreciate in that moment. Mm-hmm. And that is really key to healing. So I'm super glad you brought that up. Also true for grief. So the way I do healing, I do a few different kinds, but mostly I do silent healing. So the visuals are not going to be exciting. And I would recommend actually that you shut your own eyes and check for the experience in yourself, because that's important. That's the important part of the healing, is like, what are you experiencing yourself? So I will go silent for a few moments. And before I do that, I'd like you to just check in, see what you're feeling emotionally, check in with any sensations in your body, and also your thoughts, you know, what the train of your thoughts are, or is, I guess it would be. Okay, so here we go. I'll just go silent now. Okay, now again, just check in with any sensations in your body, what your thoughts are, what your emotions are, and notice any changes.
I do notice some changes. Yeah. It was funny. I wanted to send out healing love to all those who were suffering from fear and grief during this time. And the message I got back was, no, you're going to focus on you right now.
Yes, I get that one sometimes too.
And
I was just going to say, as one of my important teachers says, you can't give what you don't have.
Yeah, it was really interesting. And when I had that thought, I just felt my whole chest relax, my whole being relaxed. And I was grieving the fact that I'm supposed to be in New Orleans today.
Oh,
My
wow.
my boyfriend and I had planned a trip. We were both supposed to be traveling for work this week, and we were going to be meeting in New Orleans just to belatedly celebrate his birthday together.
Mm,
And I was grieving not being able to go. And so, as I acknowledged that grief, then I started experiencing words and messages and feelings of comfort.
great. That's wonderful to hear. Yeah. Yeah, and
Thank
it's
you.
true. Grief doesn't necessarily have to be over something that's huge. You can have grief over losing a piece of paper if it has something important on it to you.
Right.
It doesn't necessarily have to be anything big. And I think that sometimes we shove aside that kind of grief because we think, well, with all the big things that are going on in the world, why should I be grieving? But feelings are feelings. They don't run on a track.
Mm-hmm. Just wondering what I'm sure you've worked with people, you've done, grief is something that probably comes up a lot for your clients. And some of the success stories that you've had for people who were dealing with grief as the root cause of their illness, of their health issues, of whatever was their need for healing. Are there any stories that you can share with us around that don't
Um,
violate any privacy or?
Yeah, I think I can do sort of a general one from my. I did a class. I've done it online, but I also did it in person the first time on for empaths. I called it Empath 101 because we're so badly taught how to deal with that whole thing, And I just feel like there really should be some decent instruction for people who are more sensitive than other people to other people's feelings, because it's tough to navigate the world if you don't have that kind of teaching. So anyway, one of the people who was in that first class, she grew up in a family where there was addiction, and so their upbringing was not, shall we say, the best. And she went through that class, and one of the things she said at the end of it just made me feel so gratified. She said, "Thank you for helping me get all the junk out of my mind." And and I liked that because it was just so pithy and appropriate, and it just made me feel really good that she had made that kind of progress.
Mm-hmm. It's amazing. What is one message or concept you would want people to remember from listening to our conversation?
I would go back to the thing about not fighting things, because I think that is so built into our culture as the thing to do. You fight your way to a good career, and you fight your way through an illness, and you this and that and the other. I'm not saying that fighting isn't sometimes necessary, but I think we should think of it as sort of like an emergency resort and not like the default. I would say that if instead of fighting something, you took a moment to pause and listen deeply, listen to your intuition, you might find a much more pleasurable and easy and often quicker way to deal with whatever it is you're looking at.
No matter how unusual that intuitive message might be.
No matter how unusual it is. And I love that you brought up the unusualness, because sometimes they just seem really out of left field, but they nonetheless work.
Yeah, they sure do. Well, Sunday, how can people learn more about you and experience your work?
I would say the best way for them to do that would be to go to my website, which is extremely originally named sundayoliver.com. And on the very far right of the top nav menu is a quiz. If they go to that quiz, they will be automatically signing up. So the quiz tells them if what's going on with you, it has more to do with your being an empath, and if it is, you get some tips. Or if it's more to do with having some kind of more physiological thing going on, and if so, you also get some tips. Or the, sort of the control, if it's just like stuff in your life that doesn't apply to either of those, and you will also get some tips. And when you take that quiz, you will be automatically signing up for my newsletter, which right now, for the duration of the pandemic, I am always including links to 3 healing calls that I have. I do monthly healing calls, but I'm leaving these open because I think that people just really can use access to them. They are half-hour calls with healing sessions, sort of like what we had here, but more of them. And one of them is on grief, one of them is on fear, and one of them is on reviving from exhaustion. So I think that would be a great way for people to sample what I do and to see if it works for them.
All such crucially important topics right now.
I know, it's so funny. And I obviously did not do that since there are monthly calls. I didn't know that that was going to be the case. It just happened that way.
Well, because your intuition told you to, right?
Probably so. Yeah, right. Exactly.
Well, Sunday, thank you so much for spending some time with me and having this conversation. I'm excited for my listeners and viewers to get to know you and your work and experience what you do. As not just during these crazy times, even when things, I was going to say recover, however that might be. But it's been such a pleasure talking with you. And yeah, thank you so much. Truly grateful for you to be here with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I just really love having this kind of conversation. I really appreciate it a lot.
Yeah, wonderful. All right, everyone. I hope you enjoyed listening to that interview with Sunday as much as I enjoyed having that conversation. She's a very powerful healer, and if you're stuck, she might be a good resource for you. So I definitely urge you to sign up for her list, check out her work, listen to her recordings, see what she might be able to offer to you. And in the meantime, please let me know what you thought of the conversation. You can email me at jennifer@earthbasedmedicine.com. Or you can check out my website at www.earthbasedmedicine.com. I've got some new offerings on the table, lots of free resources. So the ebook, everything going on there. So let me know if there's anything I can do for you. You can set up a complimentary discovery call with me to help you figure out what's holding you back from living your best life. All right, everybody, I hope you have an amazing day, and we'll see you here the next time.